A little boy promised to marry an alien queen when he grew up. Decades later, he returned with a ring forged from stardust. But the queen warned him, "Time works differently where I come from." What happens when a childhood vow collides with the laws of the universe? Leo's village perched between the curve of a river and the dark shoulders of pine forests. While other children chased fireflies through the long grass, he climbed the hill behind the old mill where the view stretched clear to the horizon. There, under the vast bowl of sky, he sat with knees tucked to his chest, tracing shapes between the stars. The constellations became his playmates, the Milky Way his secret pathway. That summer's night began like any other. Crickets sawed in the meadow grass, warm earth releasing the scent of time crushed under his bare feet. Then the air shimmered, not with fireflies but with something sharper. A vibration prickled his skin before his eyes registered the glow. First a pulse behind the tree line, then an impossible radiance spilling across the entire meadow. The wildflowers cast long, trembling shadows as if caught in spotlight beams. Children's brains adapt differently from adults when witnessing the impossible. Where a grown mind might reject or rationalize, Leo's absorbed everything. The hexagonal patterns in the hovering craft's underside, the way its light made every dewdrop gleam like a tiny planet. His first thought wasn't fear, but that the ship looked lonely, drifting so far from its own stars. When the ramp descended, it didn't creak like the mill's old wood. It sighed like wind through reeds. Her footsteps made no sound on the bent grass, but the wildflowers straightened as she passed, stems flexing toward her like sunflowers tracking daylight. Later, Leo would struggle to describe her face except for the eyes. Not human eyes reflecting light, but eyes that contained light, shifting colors like oil on water catching the sunset. He didn't realize he'd plucked a handful of meadow blooms until they were already in his outstretched palm. Their petals trembled not from fear, but from the hum resonating through the ground, a sound more felt than heard. She crouched, bringing that impossible gaze level with his, and accepted his offering with fingers that seemed to blur slightly at the edges. "You smell like all the growing things," she said, and her voice held layered harmonies like multiple streams converging. She wore no crown, but points of light circled her temples, matching the pulse of the nebula overhead. When she touched a wilting bluebell in his hand, its petals plumped as if freshly bloomed. They spoke as the ship's light painted the hillside in liquid silver. She named stars on her tongue. Guttural clicks for red giants, soft vowels for binary systems. He told her about tadpoles in the mill pond, how their tails shrank as legs sprouted, which made her laugh with crystalline notes that startled owls from the trees. The promise slipped out as naturally as breathing when she stood to leave. "I'll come back for you," she said, and he answered without hesitation, crushing lavender stems in his small fists. "And when I grow up, I'll marry you." Her smile didn't fade, but something behind it dimmed. "Little one, time folds differently across the thresholds." The ship's ramp withdrew with that same sighing sound. "Remember, your words carry weight beyond this meadow." For 3 heartbeats the craft hung motionless, then tore upward with a sound like fabric ripping across the sky. The dew left behind on the grass held an odd glow, fading as the first birds began their dawn chorus. Leo stood clutching bent stems, unaware that in her reference frame, she'd already traveled years by the time he took his first trembling step home. The Queen's warning wasn't poetry or metaphor. It was physics written in starlight, as concrete as the gravity anchoring Leo's small body to the hillside. While his village measured time in harvests and winters, her people tracked it by the stretching of space-time itself, like 2 clocks submerged in different currents, one barely moving while the other raced downstream. A year for her could mean decades for him. A journey across galaxies might strand him in old age before she even reached home. That night in the meadow, Leo didn't grasp the equations, but he understood the tightening at the corners of her eyes when she said his promise back to him, slower this time, as if weighing each syllable. "Such words shouldn't be made lightly," she murmured, the nebula's glow catching in her irises. The way she held his hand, fingers lingering as if memorizing the heat of his skin, told him the stakes better than any lecture. She wasn't cautioning him against some fairy tale curse, but against the silent machinery of the cosmos. Relativity wasn't kind to lovers. Even light took years to cross interstellar gulfs, carrying messages already outdated by their arrival. For ships traveling slower, time stretched thin as event horizons. She could return, decades later by her own clock, to find Leo's village weathered to ruins, his playmates bent with age. The universe had no interest in childhood pledges. Leo clutched the crushed lavender stems long after she left, their scent mixing with ozone from the departed ship. The math unfolded in reverse inside him. If time ran faster for her, then every passing second here meant he was being outpaced by some unknown multiple. His heartbeat sounded too loud. The idea should have hollowed him out, but instead it crystallized something. His promise hadn't hinged on time being fair. Over the years that followed, while other boys outgrew their dreams, Leo returned each night to the hill. He memorized star patterns the way sailors learn tides. The meadow thrived unnaturally where her ship had hovered, flowers blooming off-season, their roots sunk into soil that still hummed faintly when pressed with bare palms. He grew taller while the lavender patch stayed waist-high, untouched by frost. His first telescope was carved from scavenged wood and salvaged lenses. He charted planetary movements on stolen butcher paper, correcting for atmospheric distortion by trial and error. Adults called it obsession. They didn't see the quiet calibration happening beneath, the way each equation was a knot tied in an invisible cord, stretched taut across light years. Every new calculation sharpened his understanding of the gulf between their worlds. The numbers were brutal. The more he studied, the clearer it became. Reaching her would demand bending the universe's rules. At university, relativity transformed from abstract threat to daily confrontation. While classmates groaned over Einstein's notebooks, Leo burned through them like detective novels hunting loopholes. His professors praised his diligence but missed its source, the way his fingertips lingered over diagrams of time dilation, as if touching the contours of a prison cell. He found her homeworld by accident, buried in a discarded astronomy dataset. The system's star pulsed in an unnatural rhythm, 6 spikes of radiation per rotation, too precise for nature. Cross-referencing old observatory logs, he matched those spikes to the night in the meadow. The coordinates seared themselves into his memory. 63 light-years away. Even traveling near light speed, the journey would steal decades. The realization should have broken him. But time had already done its work. The boy who'd given flowers was gone, replaced by a man who understood the cruel arithmetic of space travel. Instead of despair, he felt only resolve hardening in his ribs. His promise hadn't accounted for relativity, but neither had it accounted for the stubbornness growing in him like new bone. He began collecting meteorites. Iron from the Campo del Cielo impact, nickel-rich chunks that had streaked through prehistoric skies. In his rented garage, he learned smelting, how to coax metal into liquid, then shape it against the anvil. A jeweler laughed when Leo asked about forging a ring with meteorite bands. "It'll rust in a year," the man warned. Leo didn't explain about the vial of bluish soil from the meadow's humming patch, or how he'd lined the forge with it, hoping some residual charge would stabilize the alloy. The ring took shape over months, lopsided at first, then gradually smoother. He set no gem, left a hollow in the band where something might be inserted later. Wearing it on a cord around his neck, he could feel its weight shift as he moved like a lodestone tugging him toward some distant north. Years eroded the village. The mill collapsed into its own foundations. Children who'd once rolled hoops down the dusty lanes grew thick around the middle, their own children mistaking Leo for some wandering hermit when he visited the meadow. Yet the lavender bloomed on, untouched by blight or drought. The hill became his laboratory. He buried copper wires in concentric circles, recorded interference patterns with increasingly sensitive equipment. The soil remembered her ship's passage in ways science couldn't yet quantify. By the time he published his first paper on anomalous radiation signatures, half his life had slipped away. Academic journals called his theories imaginative. Funding committees asked for more testable hypotheses. None understood the urgency thrumming beneath his charts and graphs, that every overlooked solar flare might carry traces of her civilization's equivalent of street lamps. Then, during a routine scan of the old coordinates, his monitors flared. The nebula's emissions had shifted. Not randomly, but in structured pulses, alternating in duration like coded speech. The hair stood on his arms. He knew that pattern. She'd said she would return. Leo's office sat at the end of a narrow corridor at the Astrophysics Institute, its window overlooking the parking lot instead of the sky. Colleagues joked it was punishment for refusing to use the shared lab space, but none understood why he needed walls covered entirely in star charts, each connected by red thread to marked anomalies. Postdocs whispered about the desk drawers that locked, unaware they contained soil samples from a meadow that hadn't aged in 40 years. His research proposals cited theoretical communication, methodologies for deep space contact, dry academic language masking the personal stakes. Peer reviewers praised his rigor with pulsar timing arrays, oblivious to how his hands shook when adjusting receivers to detect signals from one particular patch of sky. Every grant application was a careful lie, omitting why he'd chosen this specific frequency band, or how the encryption algorithm he'd shared matched patterns from his childhood notebook. Notebook 7 proved most dangerous. Its pages alternated between differential equations and sketches of alien script, the looping characters copied from what he'd glimpsed on the Queen's forearm that night. He kept it between volumes of astrophysical journal reprints, its spine worn thin from late-night study. On page 33, a coffee ring overlapped the frequency spectrum of the meadow soil's hum, recorded during his final summer in the abandoned village. The morning staff meetings noticed his absences first. Then, the way he glazed over during discussions of exoplanet atmospheres, but snapped alert at any mention of anomalous cosmic radiation. His graduate assistant once found him staring at a raw data feed for 9 straight hours, takeout containers stacking beside a monitor, cycling through 63 light-years worth of hydrogen line observations. "You work like someone's chasing you," she observed. He didn't correct her. Lab equipment became devotional objects under his care. The radio telescope's receiver array gleamed from meticulous polishing, its surfaces buffed with cloths he'd soaked in weak solutions of the bluish soil. Technicians complained about the outdated calibration methods, unaware the reference signals matched electromagnetic fingerprints from the landing site. His spectrometer was never shared, its custom modifications designed to catch emissions matching the Queen's ship lights, frequencies most astronomers dismissed as sensor noise. 3 times he received promotions to administrative roles. 3 times he declined, citing ongoing research too complex to delegate. The dean didn't see the relief in his clenched jaw when allowed to keep his windowless office with its unorthodox equipment. Colleagues chalked up his behavior to academic eccentricity, the kind that won Nobel Prizes, or nervous breakdowns, never. Guessing both possibilities paled next to the truth. His apartment's single bookshelf held every known text on relativistic time dilation, their margins black with cramped annotations. Between the pages of a well-thumbed Einstein biography, press releases for failed marriage proposals fluttered as bookmarks, airplane banners over football stadiums, flash mobs in shopping malls. He studied these human gestures like alien artifacts, searching for some universal grammar of devotion. The meteorite ring traveled with him everywhere, hidden under his shirt. It left a faint gray streak on his sternum where it rested as if marking him. On evenings when the lab emptied out, he'd sometimes press it to the radio telescope's housing, wondering if the alloy might resonate with signals from home. Not his home, hers. Department gossip speculated about the locked cabinet in his office, unaware its sole contents were childhood drawings of lavender stalks with too many petals, their roots extending into cosmic spirals. The illustrations grew increasingly technical over the years, botanical accuracy giving way to schematics of hypothetical warp field geometries. He'd framed one particularly detailed sketch, its mathematical notations in red ink, mimicking the nebula's pulsing pattern. Graduate students mimicked his methods without understanding their origin. His habit of recording telescope coordinates in both standard measurements and musical notation spawned 3 published papers on sonification of deep space data. None caught the recurring motif, her ship's hum translated into middle C, its harmonics vibrating through every dataset. When the Institute upgraded their servers, IT staff discovered his personal backups contained terabytes of beamforming scans concentrated on a single star system. Dr. Alden's hobby project, the technicians labeled it, unaware the system's declination matched the angle at which the ship had vanished from his meadow. The backup tape smelled faintly of lavender, though no one mentioned it. Winter brought the first snow, and with it a malfunction in the primary dish array. Leo volunteered for the midnight repair shift, his breath pluming under floodlights as he adjusted the receivers by hand. The cold didn't bother him. Frost formed delicate fractals on the metal, each crystal's growth echoing hypothesized hyperspace navigation patterns. Then the alert sounded, not from the mainframe, but from his modified spectrometer. The readout flickered with a signal too rhythmic for natural sources, its pulse intervals matching those in the meadow seconds before the ship's arrival. His fingers left warmth streaks on frozen controls as he fine-tuned the input. The display settled into a six-peak sequence he knew by heart. For the first time since childhood, the coordinates were transmitting back. He didn't run to the dean's office or call collaborators. Instead, he unlocked Notebook 7's final page, where 40 years of waiting condensed into a single string of numbers, the exact parameters needed to boost a reply signal. The keys clacked with unnatural precision, each calculation verified 3 times before committing. The office heater clicked off. Outside, snow continued falling on empty sidewalks. By dawn, the dish array had sent a response packet containing one human word encoded in repeating bursts. Not his name, not coordinates, just the first promise he'd ever made her. The ring against his chest felt suddenly heavier, its hollow center ready. Maintenance logs would later show the transmission lasted precisely 6 minutes. Exactly as long as their first conversation in the meadow. The technicians assumed the odd duration was arbitrary. Only Leo knew how carefully he'd timed it. Down to the second. When the morning shift arrived, they found him still at the console, surrounded by hastily drawn equations more lyrical than scientific. Waveforms shaped like lavender stems, refraction models resembling entwined hands. His colleagues exchanged glances. Another all-nighter fueling the legend of their eccentric genius. No one noticed the soil sample glowing faintly in its locked drawer, resonating with something beyond their instrument's range. Or how Leo's left hand kept drifting to his sternum, fingers tracing the ring's impression through his shirt. Not anxiously, but the way one might count down days before a long-awaited reunion. The nebula's emissions appeared in the data feed like footsteps in fresh snow, too evenly spaced for natural processes. Leo recognized the pattern before his fingers could adjust the spectroscope. 6 pulses followed by silence, then 6 more, each burst fading slightly toward the middle register. Not random noise, but modulation, like consonants forming in a throat. The supercooled server room suddenly felt too warm. Standard SETI protocols dictated caution with anomaly classification. Natural radio sources often mimicked artificial signals. Pulsars could fool even veteran astronomers. But pulsars didn't sync their emissions to exact 139-second intervals. They didn't shift frequencies in sequences matching prime numbers. This signal carried markers of deliberate construction, each pulse timed to leave no doubt. The spectral analysis software flagged it as interference. Leo disabled the alert and ran the raw data through his own decryption algorithm, the one he'd built over 23 years, keyed to humming patterns from the meadow soil. Output scrolled down the screen in green text. Coordinates. The same celestial longitude and latitude as her vanishing point that long-ago summer, rendered now in precise astronomical notation. His colleagues would dismiss this as coincidence. They knew him as a detail-obsessed postdoc who compiled obscure datasets, not as the boy who'd traded wildflowers beneath a hovering ship. His pen hovered over the observation log. Then he typed the lie with steady fingers. Potential pulsar alignment anomaly. Request extended monitoring for thesis verification. Nights at the radio telescope blurred together. Official log showed Leo conducting routine redshift measurements while his terminal secretly accumulated signal recordings. He learned their structure. The way bursts clustered in groups of 6 when planetary rotation tilted their source toward Earth. How silences between transmissions grew shorter, as whatever sent them adjusted to his reception. It was courting behavior, though he couldn't prove it. Standard procedure demanded notifying the International Astronomical Union. Leo drafted 3 versions of the report, each less forthcoming than the last. The final copy mentioned rhythmic patterns but omitted his private decryption. It didn't note how the signal's carrier wave matched the vibration he'd felt through his childhood fingertips when the ship's ramp extended. That data existed only in Notebook 7, its pages increasingly filled with speculative schematics for reply transmissions. The Institute's director noticed his prolonged absences from lectures. Observing runs, Leo explained, sliding star charts across her desk that showed legitimate, if minor, research targets. HFY Dr. Elena Marquez first encountered Leo's research during a routine peer review of astrophysics grant proposals. His submission stood out, not for its esoteric math, but for the handwritten correction on page 17, where he'd scratched out standard light-year conversions and replaced them with a non-standard time dilation formula. The margin note read, "Adjusted for localized curvature," penned in ink that smelled faintly of lavender. She approved the funding, then requested his datasets. Their initial meeting took place in her university office, where she interrupted his technical explanations to ask why his pulsar charts showed resonance points matching no known stellar object. He admitted they weren't pulsars. Project Horizon began as line items shuffled between bureaucratic departments. The European Space Agency earmarked funds for anomalous signal analysis after Marquez demonstrated how the six-pulse pattern syncopated with Earth's own deep space transmissions. Chinese investors supplied next-generation quantum processors in exchange for data-sharing privileges. Russian oligarchs with SETI fantasies bankrolled prototype thrusters, provided their logos appeared prominently on mission patches. Leo navigated these negotiations with a detached precision that made Marquez uneasy. He conceded on branding but held firm about the launch window. June 15th, he insisted at every meeting, though the date held no astronomical significance anyone could discern. The ship's schematics raised more questions. While aerospace engineers focused on conventional propulsion systems, Leo quietly routed additional power to an auxiliary chamber labeled sample analysis. Blueprints showed intricate copper coils lining its walls, their spiral patterns mirroring the growth rings of trees from his childhood village. When pressed, he cited experimental communication arrays. Only Marquez noticed how the chamber's dimensions matched those of the meadow's humming patch. Funding battles grew fierce after the first failed test flight. Korean delegates demanded proof the signal wasn't stellar noise. Brazilian scientists questioned allocating resources to deep space projects when Amazon monitoring satellites needed upgrades. Through it all, Leo remained unnervingly calm, producing reams of spectral analysis that silenced opposition without ever explaining his certainty. His presentation to the UN subcommittee lasted 11 minutes. Just long enough to play a recording of the signal's most rhythmic segment synchronized with footage of the prototype's maiden voyage. The correlation between engine harmonics and cosmic pulses convinced even skeptics. Checks cleared within weeks. Construction began at a retrofitted naval yard in Norway. Workers installing the habitat modules gossiped about odd requests, specific alloys for door handles, lighting that cycled through exact color temperatures matching dusk in Leo's long-abandoned village. The navigation system's default coordinates matched the nebula's position, but its secondary waypoints traced a looping route past apparently random stars. Engineers assumed these were backup trajectories until Marquez cross-referenced them with Leo's childhood telescope logs. Each marked where he'd observed unexplained atmospheric distortions between ages 9 and 14. Crew selection became the final hurdle. Standard protocols favored military test pilots, but Leo insisted on civilian specialists with musical training. His unorthodox screening involved playing the 5-note sequence from the signal and asking applicants to improvise harmonies. The chosen navigator, a former concert pianist from Johannesburg, only learned later that her main duty involved monitoring an instrument, measuring interstellar resonance at precisely 439.7 Hz, the vibration frequency recorded in Leo's meadow soil samples. Leaks almost doomed everything. A junior programmer noticed discrepancies between the official mission parameters and the ship's actual trajectory calculations. His attempts to report the anomaly reached conspiracy forums instead of NASA auditors. Bloggers dissected grainy photos of the vessel's sample analysis chamber, its coiled wiring now clearly visible through transparent access panels. Congressional hearings loomed until Marquez took the stand with a single handout showing signal patterns matching the ship's upgraded comm system output. "We're not just sending probes anymore," she told the committee. "We're having a conversation." Appropriations doubled overnight. Pre-launch rituals took on strange cadences. While Mission Control ran final diagnostics, Leo walked the tarmac with a vial of bluish soil, letting granules trickle onto the launch pad at precise intervals. The ground crew assumed it was some lucky charm until infrared cameras showed the particles glowing faintly where they landed. Weather delays pushed the schedule back 3 days, an eternity in political terms. Gossip blogs speculated about last-minute cancellations, while diplomats fielded calls from nervous investors. Through it all, Leo sat motionless in the observation gallery, fingers laced around the meteorite ring, watching technicians scurry like ants around the ship's silver hull. Then came ignition day. The countdown echoed through press bleachers packed with journalists who'd stopped mocking the project weeks earlier. Mission Control's screens showed standard telemetry alongside one unusual feed, a spectrogram of the nebula's real-time emissions superimposed over engine output. As the rockets roared to life, the two patterns began synchronizing. Reporters gasped when the lead scientist handed Leo the microphone for final remarks. He said nothing, just held the mic toward the ship as its vibrations resolved into a perfect recreation of the five-note sequence. The ground shook not just from thrusters but from something deeper, a resonance making everyone's fillings ache. Launch cameras captured the moment when atmosphere gave way to vacuum, the ship trailing not just exhaust, but thin tendrils of lavender-hued energy that curled back toward Earth like seeking fingers. Mission Control's audio picked up Leo whispering coordinates under his breath. Not the official destination, but ones matching the Queen's last known trajectory. Outside observers assumed he was praying. In the weeks that followed, politicians claimed credit while astronomers debated the implications of humanity's first directed interstellar message. Only Marquez noticed how the ship's transmissions back to Earth contained subtle metadata, timestamps that advanced inconsistently, suggesting relativistic effects already in play. She cross-referenced them with Leo's old notes on time dilation and found a match. The math had been there all along, buried in his earliest proposals. Project Horizon wasn't just reaching across space. It was bridging two rivers of time flowing at different speeds. Back in his abandoned village, children now dared each other to touch the luminous patch in the meadow where no grass grew. The soil there pulsed faintly at night, keeping rhythm with a ship already decades into its journey from the viewpoint of its lone passenger, a pianist who'd been instructed to play one particular melody when certain coordinates appeared. The sheet music Leo gave her bore no composer's name, just 6 handwritten words at the top, "For when you find our song." As Earth's continents rotated toward dawn, the nebula's emissions spiked briefly in an unprecedented pattern. Radio telescopes logged it as equipment malfunction. Only Marquez recognized the structure. It matched the first phrase in the wedding vows from Leo's long-departed region. She ordered the transmission archived under a nondescript file name, then walked outside to where the project's youngest intern sat crying. The girl pointed wordlessly eastward where the horizon shimmered with a color not found in nature. Neither scientist nor intern mentioned how it precisely matched the hue of Leo's childhood wildflowers. Days later, the ship's regular status updates stopped, including timestamps altogether. The ship's instruments registered the anomaly before human eyes could perceive it, a faint shimmer along their starboard side where space itself seemed to ripple. Navigation displays stuttered, recalculating positions that made no mathematical sense. One moment they were coasting through void. The next their hull passed through curtains of light that hummed in frequencies, the piano-playing navigator identified as B-flat minor. The auroras weren't like Earth's. These were vast electromagnetic ribbons undulating through space, their vibrato resonating through the ship's metal bones. A hull camera captured the first distortion, a section of space that folded light like origami. Stars stretched into smears, then snapped back into focus seconds later. The crew's timestamp discrepancies began that hour. Engineering logs showed 3 hours of engine burn, while personal chronometers registered only 17 minutes. The discrepancy grew each time they passed through what the science officer dubbed tide pools, areas where space-time shallowed and deepened unpredictably. The radio picked up whispers first. Barely audible static resolved into fractured syllables when filtered through the ship's harmonic dampers. The piano navigator transcribed them as musical notes, creating a score that made Leo's hands shake. The intervals matched the Queen's laugh from childhood. He alone recognized it. Star clusters near the anomaly's periphery defied natural formation patterns. Perfect tetrahedrons of blue giants orbited common centers, their gravitational dance too precise for random cosmic evolution. The ship's telescope revealed structures woven between them, threads of glowing matter forming lattices that pulsed in rhythm with the crew's own brainwaves, monitored now by increasingly concerned medics. Exterior cameras showed space itself warping around their hull. One frame revealed the ship from a distance that shouldn't have existed. An impossible third-person view where their vessel shrunk to a speck mid-flight. Then the image dissolved into static. The backup system caught the same phenomenon from a different angle 37 seconds later, this time with an indistinct silhouette watching from where no observation platform could physically be. Their medical officer developed gaps in memory. She could recall prescribing sleep aids to the sleepless navigator, but not writing the additional orders in the margins, strange symbols matching the geometric star clusters. Her handwriting, yet not her hand. The ship's botanist discovered their experimental lavender seedlings blooming out of season, petals unfolding in sync with the external auroras despite being housed in light-tight growth chambers. Navigation became an exercise in surrendering logic. The fastest route between 2 points ceased being straight when space contorted like taffy. The piano navigator adapted first, plotting courses by harmonic resonance rather than conventional math. The ship responded best when engine burns coincided with the B-flat minor auroras, their hull vibrating in sympathetic resonance. Engineers noted fuel efficiency increased by 300% during these passages, though none could explain why. Then the hallucination started. Crew members reported seeing their doubles performing tasks they themselves had yet to complete. The botanist swore she glimpsed her future self pruning lavender stalks that hadn't yet sprouted. The medical officer's reflection winked at her from clean metal surfaces, mouthing words in a language Earth's translation database identified as Proto-Greek before the file corrupted. Leo remained the only one untouched by temporal distortions. His movements stayed crisp while others blurred at the edges. The crew noticed how dust motes avoided his footsteps, how the ship's artificial gravity seemed slightly weaker around his workstation. His notebook entries remained linear while theirs spiraled into looping fragments. The meteorite ring around his neck no longer left gray smudges. Its surface had become mirror-bright somewhere. Beyond the tide pools, their final approach revealed the greatest anomaly yet, an absence where the nebula's heart should blaze. Scanners showed empty space for 20,000 kilometers, yet the viewport displayed something else entirely. A refractive boundary warped starlight around a massive structure the ship's cameras couldn't resolve clearly. Only glimpses came through, crystalline spires too geometrically perfect for natural formation, iridescent planes that bent light as if it were liquid. Leo ordered full stop at 10,000 kilometers. The crew held their positions while the piano navigator played the 5-note sequence through the ship's external speakers. The response wasn't sound but light, the entire structure flaring lavender gold in perfect harmonic response. Radiation sensors spiked off the charts without triggering any alarms. The shields held despite showing 0% integrity on diagnostics. As they drifted closer, the crystalline structure resolved into architecture. Towers spiraled in Fibonacci perfection, their surfaces refracting the nebula's glow into prophecies, playing back key moments from Leo's childhood. There, a distortion in the upper left spire showed the meadow at dusk. Another section of wall replayed the queen accepting his flowers in infinite loop. The crew didn't understand, but Leo stood frozen before the viewport, hand pressed against the glass. Their landing approach defied physics. The ship descended through non-Euclidean angles, its hull passing through solid crystal as if through mist. External cameras showed impossible perspectives, their vessel both approaching the palace and already docked within it simultaneously. The navigator's fingers blurred across piano keys, modulating their descent with chord progressions that made the crystals sing in harmony. Inside the structure, light behaved strangely. It pooled in corners that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. The air smelled of ozone and something organic, not Earth's petrichor but the scent of lavender after summer rain. Deck plating groaned as the ship adjusted to gravity that pulled in 4 directions at once. Leo was the first to step onto the docking platform. His boots left faint blue afterimages where they touched the crystalline floor. The crew followed cautiously, medical scanners whirring with contradictory data. Environmental readings alternated between vacuum and breathable atmosphere 10 times per second. The botanist's hair stood on end, strands twisting into perfect double helixes without touching. Corridors stretched before them, their geometry shifting when observed indirectly. Glancing sideways revealed branching paths that vanished when viewed head-on. Walls displayed scenes from Earth's history, the pyramid's construction, Renaissance art studios, Leo's childhood village, but with one consistent anomaly. A lavender glow tinted each historical moment, strongest around figures who stood a little too still, their eyes reflecting starlight. They found the throne room at the structure's impossible heart. Its ceiling opened to a view of Earth's night sky, not as it was now, but as it had been that summer evening in the meadow. The stars hung precisely where Leo remembered them from childhood. At the chamber's center, a dais pulsed with the same rhythm as the meteorite ring against his sternum. Human language failed here. Even the ship's recorders captured only fragments before malfunctioning. Later debriefings would describe the throne as crystalline or organic, but those present saw it shift between states, sometimes chair, sometimes tree, sometimes geometric abstraction. The Queen's form proved equally unstable in recollection, though all agreed on two details. Her eyes held swirling galaxies, and the lavender stalks woven through her filaments matched the ones Leo had gifted 83 Earth years prior. The crew's perception fractured at this point. Some reported experiencing lifetimes during the audience. Others felt mere moments pass. The medical officer later discovered tattooed equations on her forearm she couldn't have inked. Herself, time dilation formulas in an alien script that dissolved when exposed to moonlight. Leo stepped forward alone. The distance between him and the throne didn't obey conventional measurement. It stretched or compressed based on something other than physical space. His hand moved to the velvet box in his pocket, fingers tracing contours that had waited decades for this moment. The planet they'd left was no longer the one he'd known. The boy who made the promise was gone. But the ring's weight felt exactly as he remembered. The air between them shimmered with interference patterns, not just light bending, but time itself warping to accommodate their reunion. Crew members standing furthest back later described watching two separate moments simultaneously. Young Leo offering flowers in the meadow, and gray-haired Leo extending the ring decades later, both existing at once within the palace's refractive walls. One constant remained through all distortions. The pulse, the nebula's rhythm synchronized with the meteorite ring's glow and the Queen's breathing, creating resonance that momentarily stabilized the room's physics. For exactly 6 minutes, the same duration as their first meeting, the universe allowed them to occupy the same timeline. Beyond the observation windows, stars realigned themselves. Constellations dissolved and reformed into shapes mirroring the patterns on Leo's childhood bedroom ceiling, the ones he'd painted after the meadow encounter. The piano navigator recognized the configuration first. It wasn't random. It was sheet music, the opening bars of a wedding march no Earth composer had written, but which every crew member somehow knew by heart. The lavender stalks on the throne brightened as the Queen stood. Her movements left after images that lingered like comet tails, time presu. The velvet box in Leo's pocket had changed shape 3 times during their approach. First square, then cylindrical, now a slim hexagon that pulsed faintly against his thigh. Its shifting form didn't alarm him. The materials inside had been unstable since their creation. The meteorite iron, smelted from a chunk of the Campo del Cielo impact, still carried traces of cosmic radiation that made Geiger counters stutter. The lavender crystal grown from meadow soil samples fluoresced under UV light, sometimes humming at frequencies that shattered lab glassware. Combined, they formed something no Earth jeweler could replicate. When his fingers finally closed around the box, the throne room's air thickened. Light bent around his hand as he withdrew it, the simple motion taking seconds longer than it should have. Time stretched here, elastic under the weight of their reunion. The box's surface shimmered between matte black and translucent blue, never settling on one state. Crew members later disagreed about what happened next. The medical officer swore the box floated from Leo's palm before opening. The botanist insisted lavender petals materialized in midair as the lid lifted. All accounts agreed on the ring's appearance, a band of darkened meteoric iron cradling a teardrop of violet crystal, its hollow core now filled with swirling particulates that moved as if alive. Rings had sealed human vows for millennia. Gold bands in Egyptian tombs, Roman betrothal rings carved with clasped hands, the double rings of Renaissance nobility, one fitting inside the other. This was different. The meteorite's iron remembered its journey through atmosphere, its molecular structure altered by fiery descent. The lavender crystal held traces of soil from the meadow where time moved wrong. Together they formed a circuit, human and alien materials bound by forces not entirely physical. Leo had rehearsed speeches for decades. He'd whispered them to star charts practiced before mirrors as his hair grayed. None surfaced now. The words that came were simpler. "I made it for you." His voice carried echoes of the boy who'd stood in the meadow, unaware of how long seconds could stretch across light years. The alien queen's reaction unfolded across multiple sensory levels. Visually, her filaments brightened from amethyst to ultraviolet. Auditorily, the throne room's crystalline structures resonated at new frequencies. The crew's instruments registered gravitational fluctuations as she extended her hand. Not the humanoid limb of their first meeting, but something more fluid, its outlines blurring at the edges. No human wedding ritual accounted for this moment. Cultural anthropologists would later parse footage for symbolic parallels, noting how the ring's presentation mirrored Earth customs while diverging in crucial ways. The queen didn't extend her left hand's fourth finger as Terran tradition dictated. Instead, her entire form rippled toward Leo, filaments extending to encircle both the ring and his wrist simultaneously. The gesture blurred distinctions between giver and receiver, participant and observer. Meteorite and crystal sparked where they met her essence. Iron darkened further, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The lavender gem's internal swirls accelerated, forming fractal patterns that defied Euclidean geometry. Instruments on the ship, 3 corridors away, registered a sudden spike in localized space-time curvature. "Your promise binds us," the queen said, her voice synthesizing from multiple points in the room rather than a single mouth. The words carried weight beyond their sound, vibrating through the crew's bones. Skeptics back on Earth would argue her statement was merely translated metaphor, not an acknowledgement of matrimony. Those present knew better. The ring's transformative properties became apparent immediately. Where it intersected with the queen's form, new structures emerged, hybridized matter neither wholly organic nor metallic, thrumming with energy that made the air taste of ozone and wildflowers. Some of the crew shielded their eyes. Leo didn't blink. Historical records of unconventional unions flashed through the botanist's mind. Pocahontas and John Rolfe, the Fox sisters, and their spirit communications. None compared to this melding of biologies. The queen's lavender strands wove through the meteorite's iron, rewriting its atomic structure while the crystal's lattice expanded to accommodate alien chemistry. A faint blue glow spread from the contact point outlining both their forms. Temporal distortions intensified. Crew members experienced conflicting sensations. Some smelled childhood homes, others heard medical monitors from future sickbeds. The piano navigator's fingers spasmed, playing phantom chords that matched the ring's resonance. Only Leo remained anchored in the present moment, his entire life having funneled toward this exchange. The queen tested the bond first. Her filaments flexed, applying stresses that would have pulverized terrestrial metals. The ring deformed, then reformed instantly. Memory metal properties enhanced by forces human science couldn't name. Its crystal component flared brighter with each test, projecting faint holograms of Earth's night sky above their joined hands. One showed the meadow as it had been. Human marriage customs often involve mutual declarations. Instead, the queen hummed. The sound started subsonic, rattling loose equipment, then resolved into the 5-note sequence Leo had spent his life chasing. The ship's external speakers picked it up, broadcasting the melody back through the crystalline palace walls. Inside the ring, microscopic lavender blossoms unfurled within the crystal matrix, impossible by Earth botany, inevitable here. Their communion triggered secondary effects. The throne room's walls became briefly transparent, revealing crew members' shocked faces backlit by pulsars. The medical officer's scanner exploded in a shower of sparks, its last reading showing both Leo and the queen sharing identical vital signs despite belonging to different species. The botanist's hair turned violet at the roots. Then came the pain. A jagged white line appeared along Leo's forearm where the blue glow concentrated. Bloodless, precise, it followed the path of his radial artery as the transformation began, human tissue adapting to whatever bond they'd created. His knees buckled, but he kept his grip on the ring, now fused seamlessly with the queen's appendage. Your world's rules don't apply here, the Queen said, not unkindly. Her filaments tightened around his wrist as the glow spread up his arm. The crew rushed forward but hit an invisible boundary 3 paces from the dais. Their shouts came through muffled as if heard through thick glass. Inside that shimmering sphere, the final stage unfolded. The meteorite ring dissolved into pure energy, reforming as a band of dark light around both their wrists. The lavender crystal expanded, encasing their joined hands in a translucent shield where new stars visibly formed and died within its depths. Leo's vision swam. He saw himself at 8 years old, knee-deep in meadow grass, then as a university student bent over telescopes, then now, all versions existing simultaneously. You still have to choose, the Queen murmured. Her eyes weren't human, hadn't been even at their first meeting, but held galaxies that now included his reflection. The pain up his arm sharpened, bones elongating, skin adopting that same faint lavender shimmer he'd noticed in the meadow's perennials. Later, historians would debate what exactly transpired in that moment. Mission transcripts contain blank spots where critical seconds should be. The crew's accounts conflict. Only 2 facts remain undisputed. When the glowing sphere finally dissipated, Leo stood changed, his left arm now resembling the Queen's luminous filaments, his right still recognizably human. And the ring pulsed between them, no longer metal or crystal, but something new entirely. The Queen turned her wrist, examining their creation with what might have been satisfaction. Beyond the palace walls, the nebula's emissions spiked, forming patterns overhead that matched the ring's internal constellations. You realize, she said quietly, this will rewrite the laws of 2 worlds. Brown spots still flecked Leo's remaining human hand. Age his human body had accumulated during the long pursuit. But when he reached to touch the ring, his movement left afterimages, as if existing across multiple instants at once. We made a promise. His voice contained echoes of both the boy he'd been and the hybrid he was becoming. Throughout the ship and palace, monitoring equipment registered the same inexplicable reading, 2 pulse signatures. The Queen's filaments tightened around Leo's wrist where the ring pulsed blue-violet. The crew shouted warnings from behind an invisible barrier, their voices muffled as if heard through water. This bond requires alignment, she said, her voice resonating through his bones rather than the air. Your cells must learn my language. Pain came first as warmth. Lavender light spread from the ring up Leo's arm like liquid tracing veins. His skin prickled, then burned where the glow concentrated, finger bones elongated with audible creaks, joints reforming as cartilage reshaped itself. The medical officer's biometric alerts triggered across 3 monitoring systems. Leo's pulse vanished from readings while visibly throbbing in his jugular. You'll lose linear perception, the Queen warned. Her filament strands merged with the glowing pathways on his arm, knitting alien biology into human tissue. Leo's vision doubled. He saw the throne room clearly while simultaneously viewing the meadow at dawn from some impossible third vantage point. The dual perspectives didn't overlap. They coexisted in his mind like 2 channels playing at once. His left kidney failed first. The organ's shutdown registered as a distant concern compared to the visceral cracking sound from his ribcage. Bones arched outward, creating space for newly forming structures that hummed like the meadow soil. Sweat evaporated off his forehead before droplets could form, the moisture drawn into his altering pores. Human-alien hybridization had been theorized in fringe science papers. None predicted the reality. Not mechanical implants or genetic tweaks, but fundamental rewiring. Leo's neurons fired in unfamiliar patterns, processing signals from new sensory organs materializing along his spine. He smelled the crew's terror as distinct chemical signatures while simultaneously tasting the Queen's homeworld's atmosphere, sulfurous and sweet, like lightning-struck orchard fruits. The ship's botanist later described watching Leo's capillaries reorganize under his skin, forming bioluminescent pathways that pulsed in sync with the palace walls. His remaining human hand gripped the dais edge, knuckles bleaching white even as the fingertips blurred at their borders. The ring's crystal component expanded, sending glowing tendrils through both their wrists like shared circulatory pathways. Pain thresholds reset, what should have been unbearable. His shoulder blades splitting to accommodate energy dispersal fins, registered as mere pressure. The Queen's filaments vibrated with stabilizing frequencies, but couldn't mask the cracking sounds as his pelvis restructured. His left eye's iris dissolved, reforming with hexagonal lenses that made his remaining human vision seem dull by comparison. The crew's timestamps diverged wildly during the transformation. The medical officer's log showed 17 minutes elapsed. The botanist's plant growth sensors insisted only 3 seconds had passed. Leo experienced it as years, decades of cellular memories flooding his altered nervous system, ancestors' experiences encoded in DNA now interpreting alien input. Language centers adapted unevenly. When he tried to speak, English words emerged tangled with the Queen's native harmonics, vibrations that made the crystalline floor resonate. His vocal cords thickened, producing sounds that shouldn't have been possible from human anatomy. The crew clutched their ears. Frequencies below 20 Hz rattled their fillings despite technically being inaudible. Temperature regulation failed next. Leo's human side flushed with heat, while his transformed limbs radiated cold that frosted the dais. Frost patterns spread in geometric formations matching the palace walls. His sweat crystallized mid-air, falling as lavender-tinted snowflakes that dissolved before touching the floor. The Queen's expression remained unreadable throughout. Her filaments maintained connection even as Leo's convulsions threatened to break contact. Only when his newly formed secondary heart stabilized its rhythm did she speak again. "Your liver can't process our metals," she observed clinically. The failing organ shimmered through his abdominal wall, its tissues glowing dull red before disintegrating into luminescent ash. New structures coalesced in its place, smooth alien membranes pulsing with slow certainty. Sight became unreliable. The throne room's oxygen molecules became visible to Leo as translucent spheres, their collisions producing miniature lightning bursts. When he blinked, after-images lingered for minutes, the botanist's frightened expression frozen like a photograph overlay. Depth perception recalibrated constantly. Objects seemed inches away one moment, miles distant the next. Taste receptors rewired. Air itself had flavor now, metallic during the Queen's speech, floral when the ring pulsed. His tongue detected individual nitrogen atoms in each breath. Attempts to swallow produced gagging. His esophagus wasn't fully reconfigured yet. A mucus-like biogel emerged from his pores to cushion reforming joints, its scent making the piano navigator retch. Consciousness flickered. Leo perceived gaps where time jumped forward without transition. 1 second prone on the dais, the next standing upright despite no memory of movement. His human memories played on loop alongside unfamiliar alien recollections. Childhood birthday parties superimposed over scenes of the Queen's coronation light years away. The doubling should have caused psychosis. Instead, it felt like remembering 2 childhoods simultaneously. Biochemical changes were the most intimate violation. Dopamine receptors altered to respond to alien pheromones rather than human pleasures. His adrenal system quieted despite the trauma, flooded with unfamiliar regulators. When the Queen reached to steady him, her touch sparked endorphin cascades that no Earth drug could replicate. Human neurochemistry had no framework for this reward system. At the 30-minute mark, by the medical officer's count, Leo's hybrid form achieved stability. His breathing still rattled with fluid but now cycled independent of lung function. The glowing pathways covered exactly 47% of his skin surface, meeting human tissue in fractal borders that shifted when observed directly. His left eye remained disturbingly alien, but the right still held familiar flecks of brown beneath swollen lids. The Queen tested their bond first. A thought passed between them without speech. Leo experienced it as words initially, then as scent memories, finally settling as kinetic pressure along his spine. Communication bypassed language centers entirely. His reply emerged unbidden through the ring's connection, transmitted before he'd consciously formed a response. "Look at your crew," she instructed. Turning required monumental effort. The botanist's face registered horror, but also a strange awe at the lavender bioluminescence now threading through Leo's irises. The medical officer's scanner showed 2 distinct DNA profiles warring in his bloodstream, except they weren't warring. They were negotiating, establishing shared protocols like networked computers. Pain resurged as final integrations completed. The last human-shaped molar dissolved, replaced by smooth alien dentition that made his tongue recoil. His large intestine shriveled, unnecessary for processing the Queen's nutrients, while new organs along his ribs flared with sudden metabolic activity. The transition concluded with a sound like crystal wine glasses shattering in reverse, fragments snapping together into perfect wholeness. Silence followed. The throne room itself seemed to hold its breath. Leo flexed fingers that were both his and not, still 5 digits, but joints moving with uncanny fluidity. His voice, when he found it, emerged layered with harmonics that vibrated the dais crystals. Did it take? The Queen studied their linked hands through the ring's glow. His question was redundant. She'd felt every cellular shift through the bond, yet she answered aloud for the crew's benefit. Enough to cross the threshold. Her filaments retracted slowly, revealing where his skin now pulsed with the same subtle lavender light as hers. Leo coughed, producing a viscous blue fluid that evaporated before hitting the floor, his transformed physiology already metabolizing waste differently. The medical officer's equipment registered conflicting signals, human enough to show a pulse, alien enough to confuse every diagnostic algorithm. Beyond the windows, the nebula flared in sympathetic resonance. Constellations shifted positions, forming new patterns that resolved into familiar shapes. The same 6-pointed star Leo had drawn as a child above his promise to the Queen. Time dilation effects became visible. Some stars appeared in their current positions while others showed where they'd been millennia ago. The crew rushed forward as barriers dissolved, but hesitated 3 steps from the dais, not from any force field now, but instinctive caution. Their colleague stood before them, yet not their colleague anymore. Something balanced precariously between species. Only the botanist dared approach, drawn by the lavender light. Her fingers hovered near Leo's altered forearm. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Leo considered the question with his rewired brain. Pain receptors still fired, but the signals now routed through alien neural networks that interpreted them as data rather than suffering. "Like learning to breathe underwater," he managed finally. The metaphor wasn't accurate. Human language lacked descriptors, but it made the botanist nod. The Queen rose, her filaments spreading like a living cloak. Now comes the hard part. Her gaze went to the throne room's high arches where shadows gathered despite the ambient light. Long angular shapes moved against the crystal walls, their forms suggesting limbs too numerous and joints too flexible. Leo's new vision resolved them instantly. Guards or gatekeepers, their function unmistakable even before they stepped fully into view. 6 sets of slitted eyes glowed. The throne room's crystalline arches trembled, sending cascades of refracted light shuddering across the walls. Shadows that shouldn't have existed under the palace's glare congealed along the ceiling, stretching downward like black oil slicking against glass. Then they detached, 6 humanoid silhouettes with too many joints landing soundlessly between Leo and the crew. The guardians of the threshold unfolded to their full height, each standing precisely 3 heads taller than a man. Their forms absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating voids in the air. The medical officer's scanner flashed error messages when pointed at the figures. No thermal signatures. No atomic composition readings. The botanist's lavender seedlings withered in their cases as the guardian stepped forward, their movements synchronized with unnerving precision. 3 pairs of crimson eyes glowed from each face, arranged vertically like pupilless embers floating in oil. "They enforce the old laws," the Queen said softly. Her filaments brightened defensively, casting lavender light across the nearest guardian's featureless face. The creature tilted its head as if studying the illumination, then exhaled a plume of grayish vapor that smelled of rust and ozone. Where it touched the floor, frost spread in geometric spikes. Every human instinct screamed retreat, but Leo's hybrid physiology reacted differently. His altered arm pulsed brighter in response to their presence, veins of bioluminescence flaring along the skin. Sensory data flooded his rewired nerves, information his brain couldn't fully parse. The guardians weren't solid matter, but something else. Localized folds in space-time given will and purpose. Ancient myths whispered about such beings. Threshold guardians, border keepers. The central guardian raised a limb that tapered into 5 blade-like extensions. The movement generated no air displacement, yet the throne room's temperature plummeted 20 degrees in seconds. Crew members' breath fogged visibly. The botanist's hair frosted white at the tips. Guardian speech bypassed ears entirely, vibrating directly through bone conduction. This union unbalances the equation. Their voices layered atop one another, generating harmonics that made the ship's hull ping from 3 corridors away. Leo felt their purpose before understanding it. The Guardians didn't hate, didn't love. They simply maintained equilibrium between realms that should not mix. His hybrid existence, part human, part alien, violated cosmic arithmetic older than stars. The blade limbs flexed, not in threat but in clinical preparation like surgeons selecting instruments. The Queen stepped between them, filaments flaring outward to form a shimmering barrier. "We rewrite the equations," she countered. Her voice gained new textures, broadcasting on frequencies that cracked the crystalline floor beneath their feet. Leo moved without thinking, his altered left hand pressing against her back while his human right clenched the meteorite ring. Their combined energies interlaced, her radiant lavender strands weaving through his bioluminescent pathways. What happened next defied standard physics. The Guardian's blade limbs struck their united barrier and stopped dead, vibrating mid-air as if caught in invisible resin. Visible waveforms propagated through the impact point, concentric rings of gold and violet light expanding like pond ripples in slow motion. The throne room's walls reflected these distortions infinitely, creating a hall of mirrors effect where countless Leos and Queens stood back-to-back against endless Guardians. "Your persistence wastes energy reserves," the Guardians intoned. Their synchronized speech patterns gave no room for interruption, no pauses for breath. "Separation probability stands at 98.6%. Attempted fusion damages both base realities. Cold statistical certainty underpinned every word. This wasn't negotiation. It was diagnosis. Leo's hybrid vision caught details the others missed. Microscopic fractures spreading through the palace walls with each defensive pulse. The subtle dimming of the Queen's filaments whenever a Guardian attack landed. His own transformed arm ached dully, feeling less like flesh and more like overclocked machinery nearing critical failure. They couldn't hold out indefinitely against forces designed to maintain universal constants. Then the piano navigator played. Her fingers found the ship's emergency broadcast controls, looping the 5-note sequence Leo had spent decades chasing. The melody resonated oddly through the crystalline chamber, bouncing off surfaces at conflicting angles. Guardians twitched as harmonics interfered with their coordination. Their perfect unison fractured. One stumbled a half-step out of formation, breaking the symmetry of their advance. The Queen seized the opening. Her filaments lashed forward like whipcords, wrapping around the disoriented Guardian's limbs. Where lavender light touched the void-black substance, tiny crackles of gold flared. "Now," she shouted, not to Leo but to the medical officer still clutching her malfunctioning scanner. Understanding flashed across the doctor's face. She hurled the device at the Guardians. It passed harmlessly through 2 shadows before striking the third with a shower of sparks. The impact site bloomed lavender where residual traces of the meadow soil in Leo's lab coat had transferred to the scanner's casing. The Guardian recoiled, its form momentarily losing cohesion. Leo realized their vulnerability. Threshold Guardians existing partially outside space-time had one foot in both realms. Attacking them required substances that did the same. Things like his meteorite ring forged across interstellar boundaries, or the lavender grown from dirt that remembered alien contact. Combine frequencies. He barked at the piano navigator. The musician's hands flew across the console, layering the 5-note sequence with the Queen's humming defense tones. Sound waves collided in the air, producing visible ripples that made Guardian forms flicker like faulty holograms. The botanist tore open her specimen cases, hurling lavender pods at the advancing shadows. Where plants touched them, the void substance bubbled like grease on a griddle. Each hit cost them precious samples, their only weapons against entities that shrugged off conventional energy weapons. A Guardian blade found Leo's shoulder, shearing through hybrid flesh with eerie silence. No blood flowed, just thin streams of lavender-tinted gel that evaporated upon contact with air. The pain registered distantly in his rewired nerves, more concerning for its implications than its intensity. Their defense was failing. The Queen grabbed his wounded arm with both hands, filaments fusing directly with his bioluminescent pathways. "We need greater harmony," she gasped. Their joined glow intensified, but so did the palace's structural groans. Reality itself protested this merger of incompatible worlds. Then it happened. Their desperate defensive pulses synchronized with the piano's looping melody and the lavender's resonance, creating an overlapping vibration pattern, The throne room's crystals amplified these frequencies, shattering in controlled bursts that sent razor-sharp fragments spraying toward the Guardians. Each sliver carried traces of Leo's hybrid biology, the Queen's filaments and the botanist's lavender in perfect proportional mixtures. The effect was immediate. Guardian forms rippled like pond surfaces struck by stones. One clutched its head, a disturbingly human gesture, as cracks of lavender light spiderwebbed across its torso. Another staggered, its vertical eyes flickering between crimson and gold. For the first time, their unison broke completely. Individual Guardians moved out of sync, some retreating while others pressed forward erratically. The Queen didn't hesitate. She pulled Leo against her, their combined bioluminescence flaring brighter than the palace's central light source. "We show them balance," she urged. Her meaning penetrated through their link, not attack but demonstration. A new equation to replace the old. Leo focused every hybridized neuron on their connection. The meteorite ring heated against his chest, its fused materials resonating with their joined energy. Through the pain and exhaustion, he reached for something deeper. The memory of the boy standing awestruck in the meadow. The decades-long fidelity encoded in the probe's coordinates. The agony of his transformation willingly endured. These weren't human or alien experiences, but threads binding both. Their light shifted from defensive gold-violet to something purer, a white-tinged lavender that made even the crew pause mid-motion. It filled the chamber with a presence that felt neither technological nor magical, but fundamentally right. The last Guardian blade stopped vibrating mid-swing. For 3 heartbeats, absolute silence reigned. Then the central Guardian spoke a single word that resonated through everyone present. Novum. New. The shadows withdrew first, folding in upon themselves like origami reversing its creases. Crimson eyes dimmed one by one as their forms lost cohesion, dissipating into harmless mist that evaporated before touching the floor. The throne room's structural tremors ceased abruptly, leaving only cracked crystal and exhausted defenders. "They accept the revision," the Queen translated quietly. Her fingers remained interlaced with Leo's, their combined glow now pulsing at a steady, sustainable rhythm. The piano navigator slumped over her console, hands trembling from adrenaline. The botanist knelt amidst shattered plant cases, salvaging one final lavender sprig with shaking fingers. The meadow still hums where the ship once hovered, its lavender taller now, roots deep in stardust and earth. Children play there, unaware they're standing on the seam between worlds. Some promises, the rare ones, refuse to fade. They root in the heart's stubborn soil, weathering time's storms. Leo's ring gleams in the palace light, its meteorite iron and alien crystal no longer separate but something new. What vows linger in your bones? Not grand proclamations, but quiet truths worth reshaping your life around? The universe listens closer than we know. Every kept promise etches itself into the stars. The medical officer's scanner lay in pieces near scorch marks on the floor. Irreplaceable eq. The nebula's light shifted first. Where before its glow pulsed unpredictably like candle flame caught in crosswinds, now it radiated steady lavender calm. That subtle change resonated through both realms. Earth's astronomers noted sudden stabilization and quantum fluctuations along that sector of space, while the crystalline palace's fractures sealed themselves with golden seams stronger than the original structures. Project Horizon's surviving crew gathered around their cracked communications console. Watching indicator lights stabilize one by one, the botanist pressed a salvaged lavender sprig to the view screen, its petals responding to the nebula's new rhythm. "We should send word," the medical officer murmured, holding a fractured tablet that miraculously still functioned. "Earth deserves to know what happened here." Leo stood at the throne room's highest archway, his hybrid body now fully acclimated to its dual existence. One hand, still recognizably human in shape if not entirely in substance, rested against the Queen's filament-woven shoulder. Together they observed the harmonious interplay below, human crew members moving freely among the palace's reconfiguring structures, some instinctively adjusting paths to accommodate crystalline growth patterns they couldn't consciously perceive. First contact protocols existed for a reason. Human history overflowed with catastrophic misunderstandings. Natives slaughtered over perceived slights. Cultures erased through well-meaning arrogance. The crew's transmission needed careful construction. The pianist assisted, translating technical data into musical notation that could convey emotional context missing from pure scientific reports. Earth's response time stretched agonizingly long, even accounting for light delay. The ship's comm system captured transmissions bouncing endlessly between government agencies, each more frenzied than the last. Is this authenticated? Have we been hacked? The botanist rolled her eyes when an astrophysics subcommittee demanded the nebula's new harmonic signature be rechecked against 3 separate databases. Then came the silence. Not static, but deliberate communications blackout as world leaders conferred. Leo's hybrid senses picked up faint traces of their panicked deliberations, encrypted bursts of fear and wonder bleeding through the vastness between stars. He knew what they feared: invasion, contamination, irreversible change that would upend their comfortable hierarchies. The Queen proved astute at human politics. Her suggested transmission contained no threats or ultimatums, simply footage of the botanist tending lavender hybrids in the palace gardens, while crystalline structures adapted seamlessly around her. "We offer exchange," she dictated to the recording drones. Not conquest, not submission. The oldest human peace offering, a sharing of living things that rooted deep. When Earth's reply finally arrived, it came from unexpected quarters. Not from the embassies or space agencies, but from a university's botanical research wing. Their message cycled through 20 languages before settling on Latin for its scientific neutrality. Semina quo modo crescunt? How do the seeds grow? The question was code and invitation both. Beneath formal academic phrasing lay hungry curiosity, the same impulse that had driven Leo skyward as a child. The Queen smiled in her alien way, filaments brightening. Her response needed no translation. She cradled one of the botanist's lavender sprigs before the sensors. The tiny plant shuddered once, then extended roots directly into her palm where no soil existed. Change always happens first at the edges. Small-scale cultural exchanges laid groundwork for larger understanding. Farmers on Earth's contested borders began receiving odd seed packets from undisclosed donors. Lavender strains that glowed faintly at dawn and required no irrigation. Adolescent stargazers noticed new pulsing patterns in familiar constellations, sketching them into notebooks they'd later bring to underfunded astronomy clubs. Leo took daily walks along the palace's reforming corridors, one hand brushing crystalline walls while the other cradled a datapad streaming Earth news broadcasts. The transformation unfolded in vignettes: rural midwives using alien hybrid herbs to ease formerly lethal childbirths, urban architects studying palace crystals' load-bearing properties, musicians incorporating the 5-note sequence into symphonic works. None constituted official recognition, but policy always lagged behind living reality. The Queen adapted too. Her throne room now featured a shallow depression, where human-style seating could materialize for visitors. Her filaments learned to dim when speaking with unmodified humans, reducing sensory overload. These weren't concessions but expansions, like a pianist adding left-hand harmonies to a familiar melody. Both worlds shifted to accommodate their connection. Earth's satellites detected strange new energy signatures from the meadow where it all began. No longer just a patch of odd soil, but a gateway glowing gently between thunderstorms. The palace's restructured observatories turned unexpectedly terrestrial, their crystalline lenses focusing not on distant galaxies, but on that single blue planet hanging vulnerable in the void. On the 3-month anniversary of the bond's creation, Leo and the Queen issued their first joint declaration. Not from the palace or any Earth capital, but from the meadow, now transformed into neutral ground where lavender stalks grew taller than men and the air hummed with possibility. Their words needed no grand rhetoric. We found each other across the dark. Others can too. Simple. True. Earth's political response remained measured. Diplomatic cables about ongoing evaluations and regulated exchange programs. But the people responded differently. Young couples began exchanging rings woven from meteorite iron and local gemstones. University linguistics departments raced to decipher the palace's harmonic language. When the first official cultural delegation arrived at the Meadow Gateway, they brought no weapons or treaties, but handfuls of soil from their homelands to mix with that otherworldly Earth. Leo often stood at the palace's observation deck watching Earth's slow turn below. His hybrid eyes could pick out individual city lights now, Tokyo's neon sprawl, the fragile glow of his abandoned village's single remaining street lamp. part of him still remembered that world's rhythms, the ache of bare feet on frost morning grass, the scent of bread baking in communal ovens. But another part, the lavender-veined part, thrilled to the palace's crystalline harmonies and the queen's filaments cool against his skin. On clear nights when the nebula aligned just so, reflected light painted both worlds in matching hues, Earth's oceans glimmering with the same lavender tint as the palace corridors. The botanist swore she could hear the 5-note sequence in tidal patterns when this happened. The medical officer stopped scanning people for contamination and started documenting beneficial adaptations instead. They were building something unprecedented. Not dominance or coexistence, but a third way, like two rivers merging so completely that neither could be extracted whole again. Back on Earth, children sleeping under lavender hybrid Christmas trees dreamed the same dream. Stars singing in voices both alien and familiar, calling them home to places they'd never been but always remembered. The Queen found Leo at his observation post one evening, both their bodies casting intertwined shadows across the crystal floor. Without words, she extended a filament to touch the meteorite ring now permanently fused with his hybrid flesh. It pulsed once in recognition. Below them, Earth's night side bloomed with unexpected lights. Not the harsh white of cities, but soft lavender pinpricks where people had planted their first interstellar gardens. Some promises don't end with fulfillment. They spiral outward, rewriting the rules of what's possible. Leo traced a finger across the viewport, not separating Earth and stars as he once had, but connecting them through a single continuous line. The universe watched and learned and changed itself accordingly. The rickety wooden bridge in his childhood village had borne carved letters from some long-dead romantic. Love is the only law that matters. Superstitious locals called it nonsense, but the villagers had been wrong about many things. Laws could be rewritten when the hearts upholding them changed first. Far below in the gardens, the botanist laughed as her newest seedling unfurled leaves in simultaneous earth soil and alien substrate, thriving in both yet belonging entirely to neither. The seedling's roots pulsed softly, echoing the rhythm of the nebula overhead, now synchronized with Earth's own magnetic fields in perfect harmony. A new equation for the universe. Simple, really, proof left as an exercise for the dreamers.